So welcome everybody to our May TEP meeting. Thank you so much for spending your hour with us today. We are very excited to talk through some of the data elements and concepts in a more analyzed form. So we are definitely in the home stretch of some of this identification work. So before we dive in, just a quick reminder, live transcription should be available. Let me turn that on. Okay, there you go. In case anybody, if that will be a help to anybody, it is available now. Please use the hand raising feature for when you want to comment and we will call on you to share what you have in mind. Feel free to use the chat at any time to share feedback or ask questions. And then just be mindful to allow for balanced participation amongst all the members here. So the first half of our meeting, or the bulk of our meeting really will be to review the health concerns analysis. So as a reminder, here is our care planning framework with some of the definitions. So person and plan details, the health concerns, which primarily includes symptoms, and then some goals, interventions, and outcomes. And this has shifted a little as we've gathered input, ongoing input from this group here on how we are going to, what is going to be a value set and what is going to be represented as a FHIR construct. And so where we've landed is to primarily focus on the health concerns with the value sets that you will see today. And then in terms of the person and plan details and the interventions, we have decided to go broad on these, so to speak, to allow for just a lot more flexibility in the data being captured and used and how it's exchanged by making use of FHIR constructs for those. So you'll remember under person and plan, we talked through the care team and discussing some of the metadata involved with the care team members and related members. And then for interventions, we are also going to take a similar approach that we will discuss at the second half of this meeting today. So without further ado, I will hand the reins over to Gay Dolan and Himali, who will walk through the analysis spreadsheet. And just as a quick reminder, there are now two spreadsheets in play. The first spreadsheet that you see up top is that initial spreadsheet where we used to brainstorm and kind of capture the whole host of everything that you all have brought to the table as a consideration for long COVID. And what Himali and Gay have done is to analyze all of those inputs, as well as any of the documentation, articles, webinars, all of the content that you've all shared, and put it into this analysis spreadsheet to have a more just concrete definition for the symptoms value sets that we are looking to create. So I will stop sharing and also pause there to see if anyone has any questions on what we are doing today and on what you are about to see. All right, Himali, feel free to share the spreadsheet and we will be on our way.
Thanks, Kiran. Do you see my spreadsheet?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Okay. So Gay, should I just go in order and review the value sets that we have put together?
Sure, I'll give a little context too. So this part of the discussion is focusing on the text definitions and some of the higher level codes that the value sets will be based on. So in other words, the high level codes you see in column G will have children that are those type of things. And then Himali will go over on the right-hand side the text definitions, both from a scope, from a focus, scope, and textual inclusion and exclusion criteria. And so these, for the most part, are going to be value sets that are used at particular places within the FHIR profiles to be sort of the grounding of what that clinical concept is. And so this is only part of it, though. You know, vocabularies and the construct of the message have to work together. And so our focus right now is, well, these are the terms that are and or will be developed to be used in generally the code area, those we'll say condition code area or observation code area in the profiles. And then within those profiles, which we may or may not get to today, and I think we actually went over another on the previous call, the attributes and elements that are available within the profiles, covering things like who diagnosed, who made the observation, the times, and things like that. So just because we're focusing on the vocabulary here right now, doesn't mean that we haven't that we aren't intending to represent all of those other things as well. And then, so we've divided the sort of categories of value sets into, if you want to scoot over, yeah, thank you, to the things that are diagnoses and the things that are comorbidities, which I'll let Himali speak when she gets there, to the where these were derived from, and then the list of symptoms that we all spent so much time talking about, and what those will look like in terms of the both the types of codes that are or will be in them, and the textual definitions. So yeah, so go ahead and start. I guess any questions before Himali starts walking through the spreadsheet. I did see there was a question about sharing the spreadsheet in Zoom in the chat.
Yes, I will grab that. So
yeah, and we might
proceed,
need
and
to
I
make
will
sure
share.
it's, you know, that it's shared properly, right? I mean, people can get to it. Okay.
Should I start?
Yep.
Okay. So basically, as Gay mentioned, this column G is the high level concept. So 2 steps back, basically. So this spreadsheet talks about the diagnosis and comorbidities and symptoms. And to represent the symptoms, we are using synomedicity terminology, and to represent the diagnosis, we are using synomedicity and ICD-10-CM. Because ICD-10-CM is mainly focused on diagnosis, it is very difficult to find the symptoms in it, and that is why we have to define the coding systems accordingly. And before I go in depth, I would just quickly walk through each column so everybody would be on the same page. The first column is data element concept column, where we
sorry, could I just stop for 1 second just to point out another general structure of this implementation guide? And then I see Jenna also has a question. But so if you still see the, like, for example, where we're just focusing on what the diagnosis is for the SARS for COVID, and we have that upper line and then 2 rows, sorry. So one, it represents a SNOMED value set. One represents an ICD-10 value set, because those are the type of code systems that people use in the EHRs to document these things. And then actually those are bundled together or grouped together into a single value set called a grouped value set. And that is the set that will be referenced within the implementation guide. And so if someone was implementing, say, and they only wanted, because the way we're designing the IG, and they only wanted to say use ICD-10, that would be okay. But, you know, and because when you reach out to, or you go and retrieve the source of truth value set, why then you can see those contained value sets literally as separate value sets in that group set. So, and that's true of all of the condition ones. We have grouped sets. The symptom ones primarily are SNOMED, and so we won't have those groupings there. Jenna?
So my questions for the TEP, actually going back up to that first data element at the top. So my understanding is there is a distinction between SARS. Well, never mind. I rescind my question. Keep going.
Yeah, no, I hear where you're
I
going.
answered my-
So like whether there's an actual diagnosis of long-term COVID, long COVID, right? So I think that's what we want both.
Yeah, I think
of
what's
those.
throwing me off is maybe I typically don't see the term infection at the end. I just usually see post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2. I don't know if I usually see the I in there, but maybe I think that's what's throwing me off. But never mind. I rescind my
And it
question. I
could
think I
be
answered
that-
it myself.
Yeah, that might be just the way the one of the top terms is. Yeah. Anyway, I hear you. I think you're right. But I mean, I think we can review the name for sure to see what makes most sense. And I think Sally has a question.
Yeah, so Gay, this is Shelley. My question is moreover in relationship to USCDI. So I think isn't diagnosis ICD-10, but the symptoms would go under the problems side of ICD-10 of USCDI for codifying within SNOMED.
Well, kind of, sort of. So we wouldn't model, I mean, USCDI itself does not define the data elements that it says. I mean, define the exchange structure, whether the FHIR or the CDA doesn't do that. It does, certainly will reference particular vocabulary sometimes. The symptoms actually within FHIR would be represented with an observation as opposed to a condition profile. And also symptoms would more likely be in SNOMED as opposed to diagnoses, which we would expect to be able to use both SNOMED, or either SNOMED or ICD-10.
So you're not taking into consideration in this USCDI, is that correct?
No, that's not correct. So USC, because we are conforming to US core, by default, we will have since we're conforming to the previous version of US core, has all the representations for USCDI data elements. We will also be moving to conform to US core version 5, which has all of the representations for USCDI V2.
V2. Okay, that was my other question. Thanks.
Right. Sure.
So I think there is one more question from Emily regarding the post-exertional malaise. Right?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I was
Yeah.
just, as you were discussing, I was looking through the symptoms section and I noticed that post-exertional malaise was not included.
I think it will be a part of fatigue value set, but we will double check that code will be added in there, or is it a suggestion that we should create a separate value set for post-exertional malaise?
Yes, I think I would highly encourage that because fatigue is a very general, broad symptom category, and post-exertional malaise, while it is a type of fatigue, it is unique and is very much a hallmark symptom of ME/CFS and is very distinct from the typical feeling of fatigue or tiredness. There is a unique aspect with the push-crash cycle of post-exertional malaise that is different than a standard pervasive fatigue.
Okay, so I have made a note of it and we will definitely have a separate value set for that.
There's a really great NIH paper about how to measure post-exertional malaise. I'll add that to the chat. Give me just a moment to find it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think probably Hamala, you can go on to the conditions next, and maybe talk. Well, I guess you probably want to talk a little bit about the long COVID value set first.
Sure. So basically, a quick overview of the columns. Column B is data element, concept C is a definition, and basically column D is where it fits in the IG profile, which would be a condition profile. What code systems we are using to build these value sets, and as Gay has explained, grouping value sets and individual University or ICD-10 value set. And then what is the clinical focus? These are the 4 categories that we need to define in the value set building: clinical focus, data element, scope, inclusion criteria, and exclusion criteria. And for post-acute COVID-19 value set, we will be representing the concept of SARS-CoV-2 infection from Synomed City, and this will, as it is mentioned in the inclusion criteria, it has been defined as intentional value sets. So there are 3 ways we can define value sets in VSAC. One is intentional, where we take the high-level parent node of an existing concept and any of its children associated with it in that terminology will be added as into the value sets. And currently for post-acute COVID-19 disorder, there is only one concept, but as that concept grow in Synomed City, all additional concepts will be added in that value set. Anything to add, Gay, on that front?
No, not for me. Other than, yeah, no, I think you had international instead of intentional.
Okay. And
that's okay. I got it. Now proceed.
Yeah, and for the value set building purposes, especially when it comes to the multi-hierarchical structure like Synomed City, where there is a parent-child relationship, we always want to have intentional value set building, because we want to make sure that we include all related children associated with it, or all related concepts associated with for that specific diagnosis or a symptom. And so all these value sets are built as an intentional value set for Synomed City and ICD-10-CM. Under comorbidities, this list is taken from the original spreadsheet that was provided by TEP to us, and it includes diagnosis, kidney disease, congestive heart failure. I will talk a little more about pulmonary diseases, fibromyalgia, zoster reactivation. I think it's herpes zoster, which is a reactivation of varicella zoster virus, obesity, and we have just combined frailty and or debility, because those are 2 separate concepts represented in Synomed City. Functional GI disorders, autonomic dysfunction, POTS, and as suggested, we have added it as a comorbidity and in the symptom list, and including malnutrition, post-traumatic stress disorder, and these 3 concepts, all of them are listed here on this spreadsheet, including myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome. Basically, we actually found very good codes about that condition in Synomed City, and including mast cell activation syndrome, and I think Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So all those concepts we were able to find in the existing Synomed City as well as in ICD-10 hierarchy, and we have listed them with the definition and inclusion and exclusion criteria. So when we have defined the inclusion criteria, and when we are defining the diagnosis, as many of you are aware, Synomed City has a clinical finding hierarchy, and clinical finding hierarchy has symptoms as well as diagnosis hierarchy. And so when we are defining the diagnosis of a specific condition, we are restricting the codes from diagnosis hierarchy, and when we are building symptoms, we are restricting it for the symptom hierarchy. There are some situations where when we are building symptoms, for example, COVID-2, some of the symptoms are called diagnosis in Synomed City, so we have to use the mix of both, but most of the time we try to restrict diagnosis to that hierarchy and symptoms to a given hierarchy. So any questions so far? So regarding the suggestion of pulmonary disease, it's a very general state or condition, and it can mean many things. So for the purposes of building value sets, GAY has directed us to the CDC underlying conditions link, and the pulmonary diseases are taken from this list, this summary, which includes interstitial lung disease, pulmonary embolism, pulmonary hypertension, bronchiectasis, and COPD. So those are the 5 pulmonary diseases that we have included in this list of building value sets. So I would like to know if these suffice the purpose, or do we need to include or exclude any of these from this list? Do these look good?
Himali Aluka Hope asked about asthma.
Asthma. Okay, asthma is not currently included in the list, but we can make a note of it and add it to the list. Anything else?
One of the things we talked about when we were investigating and the associated comorbidities, and this I think is, potentially just an academic question, but something to think about. And that was, conditions. There's conditions that made you at higher risk for getting COVID, higher risk for a worse outcomes, or a worse course of infection. But then when we think about, the sort of from the other direction, once it turns into long COVID, is the long COVID making this condition worse? So I don't know, so there's kind of two. I'm not sure it makes a difference in representation with the implementation guide, but it might be some sort of guidance that we add, textual guidance that we would add to the implementation guidance that folks might want to think about in some of the articles and research that they've done.
Yep. So I know asthma is, very common, exacerbation, and apparently looks like we missed it, but we will make a note to add it in the list and build the value set for that. I also wanted to ask if we need to consider adding cystic fibrosis. There is a pain value set, and chronic pain is a child of that value set. So all the chronic pain concepts will be added. And glad that we are talking about pain, because there is one thing that we would like to point regarding pain. So basically pain is a value set, and pain value set include all the concepts, including the chronic pain, unless we really want to have a separate value set for that. So basically chronic pain will be added in the list of pain. Would that be okay?
Be included in, right? And so, yeah. I mean, sort of following the, the heuristics that we have developed is that we want to be broad enough. If anything, we want to err on the side of being broad within the value sets to make sure, because this is, since it's such a new condition, and there's so many things that might still be discovered about it, that we want it to be as broad as possible with the value sets.
So I know I'm the one who always pushes for the broad value sets, but I do want to just pause for a second here, because I do think there is a difference between somebody having pain, on Monday that goes away by Wednesday, which would be a pain finding, and somebody having chronic pain.
Yeah, and I think what, one approach we can take as we're building the value sets is to, have a grouped value sets of of a pain value set that includes everything, and then have, some of these key subsets where if in case people want to break it out later on for other use cases or for display or for research. And so, certainly creating and adding a value set for chronic pain would be a relatively easy thing to do, and then we would bundle all of them up in a group set.
Right, and
So this is Shelley from the pain standpoint. I thought neurological pain was one that sort of stood out more for this. And then, Gay, getting back to your comment on the risk or sort of a risk assessment based off of the high risk patients that could be affected, could that be built out in the health concerns section? And
yes, these will all
values that be useful for that.
Yeah, these are all of these things will be in the health concern section.
Oh, okay. Then I think that having a section for high risk types of conditions might be useful to answer your first question before we got into pain.
Okay. Well, we won't be adding additional. We don't leverage sections like you do in CDA or in the document paradigm of FHIR.
Mm-hmm.
So when we'll have to figure out if what sort of guidance is needed around the comorbidities within the context of this dynamic care plan, where you're going to see all the conditions. Theoretically, you'll see all of the conditions that the patient has in addition to the long COVID.
And so, as Gay mentioned, we have a high-level concept, a higher grouping concept for pain, and as we came across multiple specific pains like chest pain, back pain, pain in extremities, pain in throat, abdominal pain, so we created subsets of it. And post-exertional malaise, I definitely would be one of the ones that came, and we will definitely create a specific value set for that. There is a question regarding microclots. We have pulmonary embolism, but no value set as microclots. So is that a suggestion that we need to include as a value set? And microclot is a generic term, so we'll have to see how we can find concepts around it. If there are any specific references that we can get to build around that value set, it would be very helpful.
Just one other item, and I'm not 100% sure which category this would go into, but I know the small fiber neuropathy is something that's been observed in a number of long COVID patients, especially those with dysautonomia and POTS. It's something that we also struggle with in the MECFS community. I don't know if that would be under a diagnosis or if that would be under a symptom, but somewhere I think we could include or should include the small fiber neuropathy, because it's something that I know a lot of patients are being seen for.
Okay, and I think small fiber neuropathy would be a disorder, so we can have a grouping concept with synomedicity and ICD codes in it.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
Can we come back to the question about findings?
Sure.
I guess I'm still trying to get a handle on how someone using this will deal with finding versus an entry that says chronic. So could somebody clarify for me why the finding is important to note in this?
So the findings are just a sort of I guess it's sort of a terminology word, as opposed to a real clinical word. And we really think of, in this context, think of findings equaling symptoms. And so symptoms are going to be found potentially elsewhere in the EHR than on a problem list. And so your diagnoses typically would be found either within an encounter diagnosis or on a problem list. And those typically are diagnosed conditions, whether that be ICD-10 or SNOMED. And whereas the symptoms are, in a way more fuzzy and potentially not yet diagnosed. And just also to remember that, what we're looking at here is simply a spreadsheet and not the technical representation with which these terms will be represented inside of.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
So, Kate, should I walk through the individual symptom, or how do you want me to proceed?
Well, let's see. We've got. I know we have some other areas to talk about as well. We have shared it. I think. I think if folks will, have a chance to read the scope definitions, so the text definitions that are towards the right. On the left-hand side, have we missed any of the comorbidities? In other words, the rows under diagnoses, and then have we missed any of the symptoms that we've talked about or that we haven't yet talked about? It's been a month or something, and so this long COVID is going to keeping on coming up with new things all the time. So if we haven't talked about it yet, and you want it on here, just let us know. And also, some of these sets actually have already been starting. Himalaya's already started to build them. And so, some of you may also be interested, iteratively in really examining the detailed content or the codes within each set. And so, you just let us know when. Don't let us know and say, send us every time you develop something, send it to us. But if you have a particular concept where you really want to have a look at the members, let us know, because until we publish it in BSAC, you really won't be able to see it unless we send you an export. So we can figure out a way to make that happen. Karen, it's probably something we should think about in terms of. I can't imagine that everyone is going to want to know the details of each. If they agree with the general scope, then unless you have a particular love of codes, you can know that the content will be present. But some of you may very well want to look at the details, and so we'll have to figure out a good way to share the draftly done value sets. Another thing that I think I've mentioned before on other calls, but something that we always want to think about is as this implementation guide goes through the HL7 balloting process, particularly the terminology folks at HL7 will be taking a very close look at the codes that we have included in the value sets. And they may make some recommendations. And so, the HL7 is very much a consensus-based process. And so there could be some changes, additions, requests, people that say you should not have that code in this value set, or you should have these. And so these really will always be considered draft, even after they're published in BSAC, until it's gone through ballot, final ballot. We're planning a 4-comment ballot in January. But our formal ballot is at some point later on. And so I just wanted to make sure that, you all know that what we're developing now shall be considered draft until the final ballot, and there will likely be changes And so, yeah, so don't worry too much about what the exact content is right now, because it will likely change over time.
Yep. And regarding insomnia, it has hypersomnia, and anything related to abnormal sleep will be covered in there. I do have a question regarding capturing level of disability. So is there any disability can be, when we have to build a value set, it can be, you know, a vast value set. So when we are referring to level of disability, are we looking for the classification like it's a slight disability, moderate disability, severe disability, or developmental disability? Means what exactly is it that we are looking for to include in that value set, that if there is any, you know, additional information that would help us limit the scope?
I was just thinking more about like the cases who come in and maybe are not able to return to work because of their symptoms, or maybe they can't return to school, having some way to capture that level of severity. But I don't know whether that's something that's typically included in these kinds of things. So don't perseverate on it if it's not useful, but I was just trying to think of, because that often is a way to titrate particular types of therapies or interventions.
And I think that sort of leads into David's suggestion as well. And I think one of the ways that we can bring in those specific questions and implications of conditions is through the questionnaires that are available. And we do reference, even now in the first draft, a use of questionnaire responses and getting answers to those types of questions. And then even further, once we conform to the next version of US Core coming out, they've described a simplified version of then, you know, deriving or ways to query for and derive answers to those questions, as well as observations made as a result of the questionnaire that was implemented. And so we will be, you know, reusing that work that's been done in US Core that will help us to get some of those assessments of functional limitations. Luca, you had, oh, that was a thumb up. Thumb up versus a hand. All right, so Himali, do you want, is there other?
Yeah, so I think there are two questions. One is related to disability and the other one is functional limitation. So I think functional limitation is, there is a value set for functional and motor disabilities, basically. Let me go to that. Where is that? But we do have a value set where we are including, I think I'm looking at the.
Yeah, while you're looking for that, a question for Emily. I think you mentioned the microclots. I was wondering if you had any, and maybe you already put this in the chat, I don't know, any evidence-based articles about microclots and COVID. If you happen to find any or know of any, if you could share them, that would be great.
I think I have one or two bookmarked.
Okay, super.
And so functional and mobility impairment, you know, I think this is activity of daily living, alteration, difficulty. So these are all the concepts that we have added. I think it also partly touches the disability or inability to do certain things due post-COVID. So.
And just to caveat that, these are the high level codes. So there are,
yes,
you know, there are many, many more detailed ones below each one of these.
Yes. So it would, activity of daily living would include laundry or driving or what, many of those things. And I think household performing personal care will include all those things, housekeeping activities, I think we'll have cooking and all those things associated with it. And so initially we tried to create a separate value set for functional impairment and mobility impairment, but then we realized that, they are intertwined. So it's better to have one value set instead of making it separate.
I
Yes,
just want to say how important that is. That is so important because I think often with the post-exertional malaise, having the ability to document the impairments in these patients, because it's not that they often can't do it once. It's that when they do it once, they crash for 3 weeks, and you have to sort of prevent them from being able to do the thing that they might need to do. And so just being able to classify that in a node or in a value set will be super important.
Yep. Just trying to get to the link of microclots.
Yeah, oh, sorry, I didn't mean we had to go over that now. I was
Okay.
hoping- I'm just thinking that, if we can.
I'm capturing them in the notes.
Yeah, thanks, Karen.
And Emily, did you, the last text you sent is the same as the second one? Did you mean to send a different one?
Oh, whoops, my bad. Let me fix that.
And let me go over that. I think we have Parkinsonia-like symptom as one of the value set here. So basically Parkinsonia-like symptoms, not Parkinsonism, I think, or dementia. Let me see about dementia. And so basically the way we built it, this value set is take all the symptoms, most common symptom that we see in Parkinsonism, and then find the related concepts and build the value set for it. Dementia, I don't recall, but let me check. Yeah, there is no value set for dementia.
And I'm not sure if I feel strongly about this, but since the function and mobility is so physically driven, you might want to consider thinking through whether there is a way to kind of integrate some cognitive disability impairment or something like that as well, because sometimes that might be a particularly strong issue for some patients during the phase of recovery. That goes beyond just like whether they can do function like shopping, but maybe things like if they're like a programmer, or if there's like their specific job that they can't now do because of the level of cognitive impairment.
So disability in general, you mean?
Say that again.
So disability in general.
Yeah, but just making it like a cognitive section that's different from the mobility and the functional, which is might
okay.
be, yeah.
Okay. So they might be able to do it, but mentally they are not there yet.
Exactly, like similar to the functional is that like they often will have some cognitive impairments that might show up after 10 minutes of doing an activity that preclude them from doing things like, a job, like answering a phone all day, or lots of things like that. And so that's different than a functional issue, because often those people might be able to do things around their house, but their ability to sustainably do a cognitive activity might really be so diminished that it becomes hard for them to sustain a job. And it's hard to capture that in the current system, because it's like, well, they look fine, but they're not.
So basically, when we are covering the brain fog, that thing covers the cognitive impairment.
It covers it as a symptom. It doesn't cover the level of disability that allows you to kind of address the kind of consequence to the patient in terms of getting the accommodations they might need. I mean, I don't necessarily want to fight about it, but it's just the same way that there's a functional impairment issue, like, because that translates into somebody coming in to help them, right?
Right.
But there's no equivalent on the cognitive side, and that can be a challenge for people that are kind of in the severe enough spectrum where they can't work, but then they also need like help to do some things or whatever. And I don't know that there has to be, but it is a problem. at
Right.
the level of patient
Yeah.
care.
And it's absolutely, I won't take it as a fighting. I'm just trying to understand if I can, interpret it in a terminology standpoint and how to represent it. So I'm just trying to make
No,
sure
I hear
that
you. I hear you. Yeah, no,
I
it's
understand what you are saying.
Jerry posted a question a few minutes ago. What is the most recent symptom condition to be added to the list based on recent reporting? Jerry, are you just asking about our list or just the newest symptoms that have been found?
I'm wondering whether we're beginning to see enough long haul patients that we're not seeing anything really new coming up.
Jerry, did you mean just generally as the clinical community, or just like
The
us
clinical,
committee?
yeah, the clinical community and or empirical reports. I haven't seen any empirical reports recently that suggests anything new, something new coming up that hadn't been already anticipated or seen.
Yeah, no, I certainly have reached my thematic saturation a few months ago for sure, but I think that's different for each clinician and depends on the volume of patients you're seeing. I can't speak for everyone.
So any other questions? And I'm hoping that if you have a link, it would be really helpful if you go through this spreadsheet, and if you feel something is misleading or missing, it would be extremely helpful. The feedback would be helpful. So we would make sure that we are doing it as expected and vetted by experts.
Thank you, Hamali, and everyone. So in the interest of time, I do want to just hop over to our next discussion topic to round us out. But in terms of the spreadsheet, we would love for you to review and provide any additional feedback or comments by ideally May 23rd. Our goal is to have I don't want to say vote and make everybody nervous like this is going to be locked in, but we just want to kind of have a version of the spreadsheet that is good enough for the current time and that this TEP is in alignment with. And as so we would hope to hold that vote in the June meeting. And as Gay said, nothing is really locked in until we go to ballot. So we can continue to make edits and revisions after that June point, but we do just want to kind of mark a point in time where like 80% of the spreadsheet is good enough to be proceeding with. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, all right, I'm gonna take the screen back from you, Hamali. And so, okay, I think we might have to introduce this in like 5-ish minutes.
Yeah, no worries. We can do it.
Yeah, so I think it should be quick.
So, and you'll share, you'll have these slides as well. So,
yes.
Following along in the heuristic of making sure we are broad enough for things, for everything, we wanted to put together a list sort of in clinical terms as opposed to in standardized terms about what types of interventions will be able to be represented in the implementation guide. And really that's pretty much everything, every kind of intervention. We might use different fire resources. We will be using different fire resources to represent some of these different interventions, but from the care plan perspective, they're all considered interventions. And so we have developed a list here of the interventions that kind of sort of correlate to different resources that will be profiled for use within the care plan, but again, keeping them open so that we don't, prescribe only certain types of education or certain types of procedures or certain types of labs. Even though within other parts of the implementation guide, that have covered the other chronic concepts so far, many of these are applicable across both for long COVID as well as for the other chronic conditions that have been were previously designed over the previous years in this project. I think that's even shorter than 5 minutes.
Yes, but I think the point here is to think about all the interventions that you've kind of encountered in seeing patients or working with patient from the patient advocacy side, or wherever your interaction is with long COVID, and just considering if any of those interventions, treatments, whatever you might do to help folks with long COVID get better. Whether it would, if it doesn't fall in one of these categories, that's kind of what we would want to know.
Right.
I mean, the only thing I'm seeing that's missing is care coordination, which may be considered patient education, but I can tell you it's really not, because it's all about prioritizing all of the things that you have on that list for the patient and being very specific about, like, okay, where do you get it done? Is it approved by your insurance? If you have fatigue to the severe degree, should you avoid that lab test until this point, or, and so that's a big chunk of what my nurse coordinator does.
Yeah, and that's really what the whole care plan is intended to do. But and we'll address more of that also within the care, the provider and the care team member representations that we talked about a bit ago. But yeah, I mean, really, that's the whole intention of the care plan, right? Is to facilitate care coordination. And to be honest, some of those things are outside of the context of the standard, and maybe something that's within the app itself. So but certainly the overall, I mean, much of the guide already has mentions about care coordination and and how this will hopefully facilitate that.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I get it now.
I think the one thing that might be missing is the stuff that the person is supposed to do on their own. I mean, I think that is sort of related to education, but or at least education is probably useful in helping them to know what they're supposed to be doing. But I think this aspect of self-management support, which would be on the clinician end, and behavior changes, may be good to track somewhere.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, we'll have to. I'm trying to think of translate that into standard speak, whether that would be part of the representation of within these things, like who's doing it. Each of these, from a standards perspective, each one of these things that would be transposed into a profile would be have elements in it for, like, performer, which could be a patient, and or responsible party, that sort of thing. So
yeah, I mean, could these all be procedures that are performed by the patient, I guess?
Right.
But it seems weird to conceptualize them that way. I mean, I certainly don't think it would be a lab test performed by the patient, or it could be, I guess,
could be
with some of the home devices
COVID
now.
test,
Yeah,
COVID at home test.
But
No, but I think it would be a paradigm shift, right? To have something that's patient, because the symptoms, following the symptoms trajectory by the patient, being able to send it to the clinicians on a whatever basis, those kinds of activities aren't often operationalized well in our system. And it would be great to have a model that allows for that, because that's a big chunk of how long COVID really does get better, is integrating it into your life.
And I think, even when it comes to medications, right? Like, you can prescribe the medication, but then the person also has to take the medication at home, which is, I think, the way we currently codify our system. You can see that it was prescribed, but you don't really actually know what happened at home. So, so there may not be a perfect answer to this, and we might not be able to codify it, but I think it's worth thinking about a little bit.
I kind of feel like it's going to be within each of these categories themselves on who's doing it, but it does sound like it's an area we should add guidance for within the implementation guide as to how this could be used to represent that focus. And then
and you could envision in the app, I think maybe a good metric to think about whether our paradigm would work is, the patient, when they use their care plan app, being able to say, okay, well, what were the tasks assigned to me? Like, what am I supposed to be doing to help,
right, or in the home setting, like home care goes in, and they could use the app too, where they would say, what's the frequency here? And let me set up my old-fashioned med board, which I'm sure is still used in home care, so I know if the patient has taken their meds, and so the patient knows when they are, if they have, especially if they have some cognitive, or even me, did I take that medication? When you look back on your day and you forget, did I take my vitamin? So that, things like that, things that facilitate self-care at home, will be, this care plan and with the supporting app would definitely help with self-care.
This is Emily. I just want to add that I do think that that self-care and home care is really an important category. There's a lot of non-pharmacological treatments like pacing or compression socks or a high salt diet or an IC diet that absolutely are treatments that can improve health outcomes, but they're not necessarily a medication or a lab test. And so I think having a category that can capture those non-pharmacological interventions that are very effective, like a couple of the ones I mentioned, would be really important.
Yeah, I think
even
that
walking, physical activity, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, those technically would fall under either potentially clinical test or procedure. And again, it's the who and the how that might be captured in other elements within those particular profiles. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Marlise. I saw your last comment, so I would add that to the notes. Just a quick reminder that our next meeting is on June 7th, and until May 23rd, we would love if you can continue sending us all of this feedback so that we can incorporate into that spreadsheet and get it into a better place for that June meeting. And as always, feel free to email us anytime you think of something, have another question, or want to provide additional feedback. Thank you so much for your time today, and we apologize for going a minute over, but yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well,
Press 1 to be connected to your scheduled call. Otherwise, please hang up. This is Alpha.